you know, and of course, me being me, I look at the video and I go, economist, man, my wife was 100% right. This has been such a thrill and a pleasure to listen to Richard speak. It's like going to college and actually getting a professor that you like. Um, Joe, I'm more than happy to sit here all night and just continue to listen. I'm getting a great education, and it's an honor and a privilege to hear Richard in person. My and once again, I get to say my wife was right.
Well, my wife didn't do that for me, but I have been watching and listening to you, Scott. I don't want to make this a mutual compliment festival, but I feel exactly. I mean, I was first introduced to you through watching Alexander Mercouris on TV, and that because I was learning about the Russia-Ukraine business in a way I had not seen in any mass media that I had normally seen. Then I met you, and through your work, and then John Mearsheimer and the others, and that's the only way to learn what's going on in the world these days. By thank God for the internet and for the social media that make all of this possible, so we can learn from each other. But believe me, I have learned enormously from you. And when Joe said, "Would it be okay if I shared this evening with you?" Wow, it is an honor for me as well.
Well, thank you.
So, Scott, you wrote an article for us this week, and you talked about a confluence of different factors that make possibly a nuclear war even more dangerous. And one of them was kind of new, which was the degradation of American conventional military power. You're saying their dominance is no longer there. Tell us a little bit about what you wrote, what your argument was in that article.
Well, first we have to backtrack just a bit and talk about what a nuclear posture review is. When a president comes in, he initiates broad policy reviews. The president will issue guidance, national security strategy guidance, and then the Defense Department will do its national security posture. Nuclear posture review is basically we review the current status of our nuclear deterrence forces, we evaluate potential threats, and we determine whether or not our posture gives us the capability to manage the threats using nuclear weapons. Right off the bat, it's insane because let's just start with a premise that the United States, has adhered to, not honestly, but as recently as February of 2022, together with the four other declared nuclear powers, we signed a document that says that nuclear wars cannot be won, therefore they should never be fought. And that's supposed to be a foundational premise. And yet our nuclear posture actually talks about how nuclear wars can be fought and why we expect to win them. So we see a certain amount of insanity. Most recently, the nuclear posture review, and then what's followed up is the nuclear employment plan, which is a very classified document. It's basically a nuclear war, the war plans. It went through a restructuring under Joe Biden because we were concerned about the limitations placed upon the American force by New START treaty, the last remaining arms control treaty that capped the number of deployed strategic weapons at 1,550. And this was a bilateral treaty between the United States and Russia. When the treaty was negotiated in 2009, 2010, China wasn't a factor. It was a nation that possessed several hundred nuclear weapons. They had a nuclear posture, which was purely defensive in nature, the no first strike policy, older weapons, we weren't concerned. And yet, the fact that the dilapidated state of the Chinese nuclear arsenal, strategic nuclear arsenal, caused us to get cocky. When we spoke about Taiwan, the hint was always if China were to move on Taiwan, we'd intervene, and if China resisted us, conventionally in a manner which placed our intervention at risk, we would respond with nuclear weapons. And one of the things we talked about was the concept of a preemptive nuclear strike, because China's nuclear arsenal was so small that we could actually use very little of our nuclear arsenal and eliminate China's nuclear capabilities. Well, the Chinese listened, and of course, China being China, decided that they were going to engage their very good defense industrial base, and they began to build new nuclear weapons. DF-41 is a solid propellant ICBM that's better than anything we have. We can't even build a solid propellant ICBM anymore. The Sentinel, which we're trying to replace the Minuteman III, is prohibitively expensive. May never get built. But the Chinese built the DF-41 rather quickly. And then they went out and they dug 300 holes in the western deserts of China and took 100 missiles and said, we're going to play, whack-a-mole. If you think you can take out our force, you have to target all 300. Now that means that our targeting became very complicated because we don't know where they keep the missiles, and so we have to hit them all. And when you divert a strike package for 300 separate targets, it's not one warhead per silo. We actually have a plan, or there's ways that nuclear targeters talk about collapsing silos. Probably classified, so I won't go into too much. But you allocate the capability to the desired result. But to do this with China, we suddenly were draining a significant portion of our nuclear arsenal, and they said we are unable to maintain, the ability to strike Russia and China simultaneously under New START. So we redid how we target, and Theodore Postal has written a very good article about this, about changing the fusing and such, so that we now can do one weapon per silo. But the Chinese looked at this and they said, so you guys are preparing for a preemptive nuclear strike against us, and they further enhanced their nuclear capabilities. The stupidity of this is one of the driving factors behind the United States not renewing New START treaty in February of this year. We allowed it to expire because it's just easier for us to do away with arms control so we can build more nuclear weapons so that we have sufficient weaponry to take on the Chinese. But this is at the strategic level. This is still, we're dealing here with, you don't go from A to Z in this scenario, Z being nuclear exchange. There's a lot of conventional, escalation ladder stuff that's going to take place beforehand. Premise on the notion that we maintain, as Trump said in his national security strategy document, that we will maintain conventional power overmatch over the Chinese. We have this belief that our technology and the quantity of weapons and the quality of weapons is such that we have overmatch against China conventionally, and this alone settles the issue of whether or not there would be a nuclear war with China, because China will be defeated by us conventionally, and we don't have to worry about this escalation. This is premised on things such as sufficient quantities of long-range standoff strike weapons, sufficient quantities of anti-missile interceptors, PAC-3. These are all things that are factored into this thinking. The same holds true with Russia. If you remember back when the early on in the special military operation, the West put forward this notion that Putin was panicking. He wasn't, never has been, but we said he was panicking, and that he would use nuclear weapons against Kiev. There was a big fear in 2022, 2023 that, oh my God, the Russians are going to use nukes. And so NATO and the United States made a very public announcement about if Russia were to nuke Ukraine, the response would not be nuclear, but it would be conventional and overwhelming. That Russia would be taught a lesson that it's never experienced before. That if they dare put a nuke on Ukraine, our conventional overmatch is going to swamp them, come in, take out everything. It's going to be the end of Russia. Don't even think about it, Russia. Conventional overmatch, premised on long-range standoff weapons and high-quality ballistic missile interceptors to protect ourselves. Now we go to war against Iran. The first thing that happens is the concept of conventional overmatch immediately goes out the window. I don't know what these people were thinking. We couldn't beat the Iranians, and we're thinking we could beat the Chinese and the Russians. So right off, there's a problem with the quality of our weapons. They're not that good. They're not as good as we thought they were. There's also a problem with the quality of our targeting, having subordinated targeting away from targeteers like myself to Palantir-driven AI targeting models. We dumbed it down, which means that what we're hitting isn't hitting what we want to hit, etc. And then the Iranians were able to use ballistic missiles against us in a manner that caused us to use a lot of our interceptors. We ran out of ammunition, and we didn't defeat the enemy. That was a big problem. The 39-day war ended on day 39 because we simply ran out of the ability to continue the conflict. Now, we took a pause. Donald Trump admits that he lied about the MOU. He lied about it. He just was taking a pause to get oil and bring in ammunition. Where'd they get the ammunition? They stripped it from South Korea. They stripped it from Japan. They stripped it from Europe. They stopped sending ammunition to Ukraine and re-diverted it to bring it all into the Middle East. And then we started the war up again, and we ran out of ammunition. And what did we do next? We went to our stockpiles in the strategic reserves that the European war commanders and the Pacific war commanders rely upon, and we stripped those. And then we started renewing, and we ate through these. And when we're told that there is no more conventional munitions, this is the truth. We don't have sufficient long-range strike resources to last more than a week against the Chinese. We have no ability to defend ourselves against North Korean or Chinese ballistic missiles. We have depleted almost the totality of our high-quality PAC-3 things. The same thing in Europe. The idea of sending a devastating strike against the Russians is laughable. We don't have those weapons anymore. If you remember, General Chris Donahue earlier this year gave a speech in Wiesbaden when he spoke. He was the commander of U.S. forces in Europe, and he said, Kaliningrad is just 49 miles wide, and we can just take it off the map. We have the ability to do this. We've been preparing for years, precision targeting, etc. We can take everything out. Well, Chris, you can't do that when Chris is fired, so it doesn't matter if the guy took over. You can't do that because you don't have any ammunition. I mean, even if your targeting is good, you don't have the ammo anymore. Plus, now when the Russians respond, you can't defend yourself. So we have literally dropped ourselves down to where we cannot wage war at all. Conventional war, we can't wage conventional war now against a peer level enemy. I'm not saying that we can't start one and win. We can't start one. It would be over on day one. We lack the capacity to inflict any meaningful harm, and we lack the capacity to defend ourselves against what would be an overwhelming response. Look at Ukraine today. No air defense. And it's just, could you imagine Europe being laid naked like this? And this is exactly what happened to Europe. They cannot defend themselves. Taiwan, there's no defense. Japan, there's no defense. South Korea, there's no defense. We have taken it all away. So now that Donald Trump has to acknowledge we don't have any ammunition, what do? We redo the nuclear posture. We are lowering the threshold for the use of tactical nuclear weapons, so that early on now in any campaign against China or Russia, where we would normally be using long-range standoff conventional weapons, we're going to go nuke early because we have no other option. So if we get into a shooting match with Russia over, say, Kaliningrad or the Baltics, or we get into a shooting match with China over Taiwan, we are going to be starting the war with tactical nuclear weapons because it's all we have left. That's it. And I just want people to understand that at no time has the Pentagon ever had a war game where we simulate the use of tactical nuclear weapons where it doesn't escalate rapidly to a general nuclear exchange where all humanity dies. And this is where we're at. This is the insanity of the moment. This Iran conflict has actually created an existential crisis for the world. So now we come back to what happened in February of this year, the termination of New START. There's been no desire, and Joe, you know me, this has been my passion, New START, keeping New START alive. I put everything I had into this. 2024, I made a part of, and I'm pretty proud because in 2024, because of the work we were doing, we actually got Donald Trump to say these things about nuclear weapons that were smart, like I don't want to start a nuclear war, these are the things I'm going to do. And it was like, wow, there's a response. There might be a chance here. Turns out there's no chance. The Russians have no interest. I went to Russia thinking that I was going to be able to engage on nuclear disarmament and was put in my place by the Russian government that said we're just not interested in this topic at this time. And the Chinese have just been reticent against having any conversation about nuclear disarmament. They say that's a bilateral problem between the United States and Russia. Sort it out, and then we'll come in. This can't be allowed to continue. And I'm going to re-engage on this issue because we have to have arms control now. It's more important now than ever. I liken this scenario, the situation we're at right now, to the situation that existed in the late 70s, early 80s regarding intermediate nuclear forces. When the Soviets deployed their SS-20s and we responded by sending Pershing IIs and ground-launched cruise missiles into Europe, we were at hair trigger from imminent death. The reason why we suddenly decided that arms control was good is because everybody woke up one day and went, we're all going to die. All it takes is one mistake, one hiccup, and we're 7 minutes away. A Pershing II launched is 7 minutes away from hitting Moscow, which means there's no time for Moscow to react if an accidental launch takes place or if they detect a radar finding that turns out to have been wrong. This scared everybody. The Russians in 1983, Able Archer, put their SS-20 force on nuclear alert. It means the SS-20s were out in the field ready to launch against Europe any hiccup. That's how close we came to dying, and the people said, we can't do this. We signed the INF Treaty, and we got rid of these weapons. This is the moment now that we're at. We have to get collective recognition, and China has to wake up to this too. Collective recognition that we have to find a way to bring arms control back in to stop this insanity. We can't have a situation where a major power like the United States has said we will use tactical nuclear weapons early on in a conflict. This is insanity. So the good news is I was introduced to the Chinese military attachés in Washington, D.C. and had a conversation with them. And the colonel responsible for arms control wants to talk and is talking about going to China and beginning to have this dialogue about this. Not negotiations. I'm not a U.S. government official, but this is unique that China is now saying, hey, we might want to actually explore concepts pertaining to arms control. And maybe the Russians will wake up on this as well. And who knows, maybe the Trump administration will finally grow a brain cell and decide that rather than committing collective suicide, maybe arms control that created a scenario where we wouldn't have to consider using tactical nuclear weapons early on in the conventional conflict, maybe we wouldn't have to go down that route. So anyways, that was my article in a nutshell.
But in the meantime, we're living on a knife's edge here. I recall when you went to Capitol Hill. It was in 2024. I was with you that day. And that was when Biden was still in office and he was threatening the storm shadows or the ATACMS go into Russian territory, and Russia was threatening that it could lead to a nuclear war. And it didn't happen. Are we in a more dangerous situation now, my question, than we were at that time when Biden was first threatened?
Let's revisit this and talk about just how dangerous that time was. Because you're right, you were there. You remember the conversation we had with the staffer of it was actually with the principal. I won't use his name because he hasn't given us permission to use his name, but a very senior member of the party not in power. And he talked about the briefing that he had received, that they had collectively received about, from the CIA, are the Russians bluffing? And that was the question I said, are the Russians bluffing? Because the Washington Post was saying the Russians were bluffing. And I said, is this what you got? He said, no. The CIA actually said the Russians aren't bluffing. And that there was a greater than 51% chance that there would be a nuclear war by the end of this year. But he said, that's not the scariest thing. The scariest thing was that in the same room were the Biden administration officials, and when everybody looked at them, they went, yeah, nuclear war, we're ready. I mean, that's scary. And then you reflect on what Rear Admiral Buchanan, the J5, the nuclear plant for Strategic Command, said in late November at a CSIS meeting in Washington, D.C. during the question and answer period, asked about the Russians and the Russians making nuclear, new nuclear posture, etc. He said that we are ready to have a nuclear exchange with Russia and win. So a nuclear exchange means nuclear war. People need to understand that. But the interesting thing is, he said, maybe it's time we be honest with the American people about what winning means. Because it doesn't mean that life continues the way it does today. A nuclear war, even one which we won, means the end of America. It means the end of the constitutional republic because martial law will be declared. There will not be the infrastructure that we're used to. Life will be hell on earth. Literally, what the Biden administration decided is that in order to save America, they would have to destroy America. And they were ready to do it. That's pretty damn dangerous, Joe. That's a very, very, very dangerous situation. So now, is today more dangerous than that? I think we're at the same situation, the same level of insanity. Because what the Trump administration is saying is that they are prepared to use nuclear weapons early on against Russia and China, and that they feel that this will be what's needed to achieve victory. So we're going to use these nuclear weapons, and if we use enough of them early on, because that's what this posture is about, not just using nuclear weapons earlier in the escalatory ladder, but to use enough of them early on that we win. So it's the same concept, the same insanity, which comes back to, a notion. When we talk about the nuclear enterprise, there's no difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. The nuclear enterprise, the American nuclear enterprise, is apolitical. It's a disease of America, an addiction of America to nuclear weapons. It doesn't matter what your party affiliation is. At the end of the day, we will always default to going to nuclear war unless we get arms control. And we need John F. Kennedy, the spirit of Kennedy. We need, a visionary to recreate, to resurrect the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency and make arms control one of the driving factors of American diplomacy, no longer subordinate. What's happened recently is that we've done away with, dedicated arms control professionals. We now, for instance, under the Trump administration, the person responsible for arms control is also responsible for counterterrorism and counter-narcotics, which means that arms control is at the bottom tier. Nobody's talking about arms control anymore. We need to make arms control a principle in the national security team with dedicated staff, and we have to say this is the primary focus of our national defense policy, is how to prevent a nuclear war. We have to re-engage diplomatically. We have to be understanding that we can't fight a nuclear war. And this is going to require the American people to wake up. Very rarely does anything happen in a vacuum in Washington, D.C., meaning on their own volition. You don't often get, politicians and bureaucrats to wake up one morning and go, I should have had a V8. We should be doing this completely different. There has to be political impetus. And this is where I think what Richard Wolff was talking about, these same kids that are out there, refamiliarizing themselves with socialism. I think these are also the same kids that we should be engaging with on issues relating to arms control and the necessity of nuclear disarmament. Because the same future they're worried about economically is being threatened by nuclear weapons. And if they can start electing politicians, which they've proven they can do, maybe the politicians that are in power will understand that they have to change the way they're doing things in order to stay in power, to win this vote over. And if we make not just economic change in America, but national security change, like Gaza. People woke up about the genocide in Gaza, and they've been, Joe, you know that how I feel about Hind Rajab, you know how I feel about Gaza, and everybody should understand that it's very important to me. But Gaza is one place in the earth. A nuclear war destroys all of the earth. And we have to be engaged on nuclear disarmament because it invokes a level of destructiveness that would make Gaza pale in comparison.
Now, as NATO is talking about direct war with Russia by 2030, and as they continue to feed Ukraine with drones and long-range missiles, and there's talk about even longer-range missiles going there. And there are people on both sides, in NATO and on the Russian side, who openly advocate the use of nuclear weapons. I mean, you'd have to be a very optimistic person to think that this could be overcome. And what you just said about arms control is all true. But there's a lot of work that has to be done before that comes back on the agenda, as you said, even in Russia and China, as of course in the U.S. as well. So, I mean, how close are we? What I'm trying to get at is, I don't want to be too alarmist about this, but you brought up Hiroshima and how people have forgotten what that was, and why we need to remember that. And how close are we to, does the Europeans, do they want a nuclear war with Russia? Are there European leaders who actively think they could win a nuclear war? This is the question.
Here's the problem. Both in Europe and in the United States, I mean, for decades now, when the Cold War ended, we had in the United States very advanced Russian area studies programs at our universities. And we trained military professionals and we trained diplomatic professionals to be subject matter experts. And these people understood the reality behind U.S.-Russian relations. Today, we're not allowed to engage in an honest fashion intellectually on Russia. I mean, what I'm trying to do, I call it waging peace. I go to Russia. I investigate what I call the Russian reality. I capture it. I bring it back through a podcast and through writing and stuff like that. That was deemed by the Biden administration to be one of the great threats. I mean, that's why they took my passport, so I couldn't keep doing that. And that's why they raided my home, to accuse me of being a Russian agent, because that was not the message they wanted. They wanted to keep the dumbing down of Russia. Why? So that people could say that Vladimir Putin is bluffing, that Russia is weak, that the Russian economy can collapse, to create these fictitious narratives about how weak Russia was to justify the policies that we were embarked on. Nobody wanted to talk about the truth, about the resilience of Russia, about the strength of Russia, about the danger of Russian retaliation. We didn't want to have that conversation. And so in Europe today, it's the same thing. They've been infected with the same Russophobia that America's been infected with. What this means is that when they speak about Russia, it's not that they believe that they can win a nuclear war against Russia. They believe Russia's bluffing. They believe that it's all bluster, that Putin's so weak that the only thing he has left is to rattle that nuclear saber. And that's it. It's an act of desperation. And so they will double down. They say, we're going to double down, we're going to double down. But anybody who knows Russia, who studies Russia, understands that, I mean, there's no bluff here. There's an old saying, that the Russians are slow to harness, quick to ride. And it's a good thing, especially when it comes to nuclear doctrine. The Russians aren't going to jump on the nuke. You talk about people in Russia. We know Sergei Karaganov is a name that dominates this debate. We know that in 2023, I believe, he first published a paper that postulated the question, would America be willing to trade Poznan for Boston? Meaning that if Russia was to launch a nuclear weapon against the Polish city of Poznan, would the United States retaliate knowing that Russia would take out Boston? And the Karaganov's thing was, no American would trade Boston for Poznan, which means that Russia should take advantage of this by using nuclear weapons preemptively against Europe to send a signal to the Europeans. Well, Vladimir Putin quickly came out and said, no, that's not our policy. But then in 2024, Vladimir Putin invited Sergei Karaganov into the inner circle to redo Russia's nuclear posture. And Russia's nuclear posture, which was published in 2025, set down the conditions under which Russia could use nuclear weapons. One of those is if nuclear powers like the United States provided a non-nuclear power with the ability to strike deep into Russia conventionally, that could trigger a Russian nuclear response. Hence what we talked about with Joe Biden giving Ukraine the ability to use ATACMS missiles deep. At that time, we talked to people, and for whatever reason, whether we triggered it, we were part of it, Donald Trump did exactly what we were asking Donald Trump to do. He made a public statement saying, when I'm president, I will not authorize attack and strikes deep into Russia. And the Russians went, okay, then we're going to hold off. But I think Europe is just dealing with ignorance right now. They think that Russia's bluffing. I don't think that they want a nuclear war, but their incompetence is getting us to the point. I mean, when you have a German foreign minister, a former foreign minister, come out and say that Kaliningrad is German and should be returned to the Germans. When you have Lithuanians saying we can take Kaliningrad, it's just, wait, do you guys understand that the Russians aren't bluffing, and this would trigger a conflict that would turn nuclear? This is the danger. This is the absolute danger we have, is ignorance. And you said we have a lot of work to do. One of the things that I've been trying to do, and it's very difficult to do, is to set up a mock START treaty negotiation. Because sometimes the people in power have to be sort of shown, led to water and said, look, let me teach you how to drink. You're thirsty. Let me teach you how to drink. A mock negotiation. And I had a Russian institution that was ready to do it. Some interest on the part of the Russian government, and we were working on the United States, but this was to keep New START revived, and then New START expired, so I did away with it. Maybe it's time to revisit this issue and have mock treaty negotiations where we go through these issues, we work these issues out to see what a treaty could look like. Not because we're not actually negotiating, but go through the process of what a treaty could look like. What are the problems that would come up? And that process is educational. So people are looking at that, and it's not just about arms control, but it's about recognizing the danger that exists. We need to get the European population engaged on this as well. Remember, one of the things that drove INF was the German people coming out in the streets and basically collapsing a government over the INF issue. There are other issues as well, but this was a big deal. In 1982, America put 1 million people into Central Park. June 24th, 1982, 1 million people in Central Park about arms control, supporting arms control. We need this kind of reawakening today. We need people to come out and send a message to their people. And you say you don't want to be alarmist. I mean, the point is, though, Joe,
Too alarmist.
it's not just to say that there's going to be a war tomorrow, but if there is, we're all dead. At what point in time in the risk management that goes on in day-to-day life do we find this acceptable? And it just, any accident that could happen, any mistake could lead to a crisis where the United States says, oh, we need to use tactical nuclear weapons up front. That's the end of the world at that point in time. What is the percentage that can happen? I don't know. But if there's any percentage that can happen, that's unacceptable. We need to take that percentage to zero, and that can only be done through effective arms control.
I said too alarmist. I'm willing to be a little alarmist.
Alarmist.
I was in Germany at that time during that Persian missile protest, and the awareness during the Cold War of the public of the danger of nuclear war, maybe a residue from the Cuban Missile Crisis, but then generations later, including up to the 80s, was much greater. Tell me about the danger of the public not being that aware of the danger of nuclear weapons. Probably much closer to that danger now than we were in 1982. Maybe not, because there could have been an exchange in Europe. What about the lack of understanding in the public compared to what it was in the Cold War? Why are people why are they lulled into or ignoring this danger? What are the reasons for that?
One is apathy, just the apathy of a citizen that's no longer engaged. I mean, what are we defending? What are we afraid of losing? And when people, don't identify with something, if something's not worth defending, then threats against that don't matter. People also today have the ability to escape into an artificial reality through the internet, through social media, through artificial intelligence. Back in the 80s, you didn't have that. There was no email. You wrote a letter, put it in the post box, and then you waited a week to get a letter back. You know, life was different, and people were living life, and I think life had meaning. Plus, when we spoke of nuclear war, because in my article I said, let Hiroshima be the reminder. I said, let Hiroshima be the reminder. But, I mean, when people today look at these movies with the computer-generated graphics, I mean, hell, we blow up entire universes. I mean, there's things happening. We become so immune to the horror of a nuclear holocaust. I mean, what happened to Hiroshima is nothing compared to what happens in some of these, terror movies that come out. People stop viewing that as being real. I remember when the movie Oppenheimer came out, and I was so excited about this because I said, this, if it's done right, will bring terror into the hearts of everybody when they see. And I remember watching the scene as they set up the nuclear test, and I'm like, this is going to be it. This is going to be the thing that's going to wake the American people up. They're going to see this, and they're going to go, oh my goodness. And it happened, and I went, that didn't scare me. It was nothing, because it didn't scare me. It was like, cool. People were going, oh, nice effect here, nice effect there. But nobody went, oh my God, that could be happening to us today. People have lost the ability to view nuclear war as real. Look, when I was a kid, and I've told this story before, my dad would go down into the bunker when we lived in West Germany, and that meant that things were happening. And he would tell my mom, that they had a code word, The Last Babylon, which is the name of a book that was published in the 1950s, 1960s about nuclear war. And if he called my mom and said The Last Babylon, that meant that he was going to the bunker and maybe it's time to get the kids together and start looking at family photo albums because bad things could happen and we may not wake up in the morning, kind of stuff. And I remember one time there was in The Last Babylon moment. I think it happened twice when we were in Germany. And the next morning, of course, we were live, so we had to go to school. Now imagine going to school, knowing that your dad's in the bunker, and that means the world's going to end. And so you're going to school, and everything. Now, I played football at that time, and I remember going out for football practice, and the A40 highway was going by, and trucks would go by, and the sun would hit the rear view mirrors, and you get that flash. And so I'm sitting there trying to focus on football, and I come in, and all of a sudden you see that flash. And the first thing in my mind was, oh, damn, that's it. And then you're looking, and you're like, oh, but the adrenaline, I mean, it wasn't good adrenaline, it was terror. I hated that, but we need that today. We need every American to live in terror and understand what it means. The concept of that flash turning into the thermonuclear explosion that immediately consumes you and everything around you, and you're gone forever. There's nothing left. And when it happens, if you live, you don't want to live. We have to find a way to. This is why I was trying to make a movie called 38 Minutes, and I'm going to revive this project now because, I stopped it again because the goal of 38 minutes. 38 minutes is the time frame that the people of Hawaii, remember that when they got the missile launch warning?
Yes.
And for 38 minutes, they thought they were all going to die. I mean, people were literally panicked, running around because missiles were inbound. This is real. This is not a drill. And they're going, where can we go? Jim Carrey famously talks about getting a phone call from his producer, and she said, do you want to meet? And he said, I'm not going to spend the last 10 minutes of my life. Okay, he said, I'm going on the beach, and I'm just going to sit there and watch life before life ends. We have to capture that. We have to bottle that. We have to bottle that fear that those people felt and get it out to the American public. So I'm going to revive this project. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but we have to train people to be afraid of nuclear weapons because they're not today. They're just simply not. They don't think it's real. They think it's it's a bluff. They can't comprehend because it's so insane, Joe. During the Cold War, we experienced, the Soviet Union, the Soviet threat, the ideological threat, better dead than red, kill a commie for mommy, Sputnik. And so there was sort of a logic behind Armageddon. We understood, we didn't agree with it, but we understood that this was real, that this is really happening, and we understood why it was happening. But then the Soviet Union collapsed, and that complete foundation of logic went away. And so people today they can't go from A to Z. During the Cold War, we went A, B, C, Cuban Missile Crisis, D, E, F, G, Prague, H, I, J, this, and there was this escalation of things that happened that we went, oh God, yeah, boom. Today, there's none of that. Nobody looks at Russia today and says, oh, we fear existentially, or China. I mean, China's a cool place. Hell, you go to China, you can go out in a AI-driven drone. I mean, they literally have flying cars in China now. You can go in there and they fly you to where you want to go. China's cool. High-speed trains, all this cool stuff. Nobody's looking at China going, they have DF-41s, most advanced, ICBMs possible, that if fired, one DF-41 would take out the west coast of the United States. Nobody thinks about what would happen with, 100 kiloton warhead blows up over LA and the amount of death that would happen. But no one thinks about that anymore. They don't understand that in China, there is this capability, not just to fly cool drones and all this stuff, but to destroy America. In Russia, the Sarmat missile, one Sarmat missile, the heavy ICBM, will take out Europe, will take out all of Europe. One. And the Russians have a whole bunch of them. They have the Poseidon, which can sit off the coast. Right now, it's an underwater remote drone. They can fire it from their submarine, and it sits off the coast at the bottom, undetectable, and when triggered, comes up a huge, massive bomb that will send a tidal wave of water that floods the entire East Coast, destroying every city on the East Coast. These are the weapons that we're talking about today that exist. They should scare everybody to death. We should not be allowing these weapons to exist as humanity. We have to find a way to bottle the fear. And right now, nobody's afraid. They're going to listen to what I'm saying, saying, oh, you're just, chicken little, Well, maybe. But the moment I'm proven right, it's too late. We're all dead. I don't want to be proven right. I'd prefer people going, Scott, you're. But you guys have to understand, if there's even a slight percentage of what I'm saying coming true, that's too much. When we talk about the existential survival of all of humanity, we have to bring the possibility of something happening that could trigger that down to as close to zero as possible. And this should be the goal and objective of every rational human being on the planet.
You talked about the film Oppenheimer and didn't scare you. Well, I'm thinking of two films from the Cold War, the first Cold War, that did scare me, at least. I think lots of people. One, On the Beach.
Yep.
Kubrick, fantastic film, which really was chilling about the possibility of nuclear war. That was 1959, I believe. And then Failsafe, right?
Yep.
Where the mistake is, we have orders given to drop a bomb on Moscow, and they can't stop the pilot. And these films had a huge impact. I think if you imagine what the end of the world might be like and what could bring about a nuclear war, one of the elements is people stop paying attention. They stop being aware. They stop being afraid. And it happened without anybody noticing it. So we are plugged into this. This is the second show in a row we've had about nuclear war, and I published many articles this week about that because of Hiroshima. And but the public at large is not, and they were then. And part of that is the Hollywood film that you say not as good, and the media, I don't think, is focusing enough on this possibility. But as long as Europe and the United States, but Europe in particular, wants to overthrow the government in Russia, which is behind this entire Ukraine project, they are, I think, going to keep. How far will they push it, even if it means nuclear war? Is there a point where they will say, okay, we got to stop because this is getting too dangerous? I don't see that.
Well, right now it's insane. I mean, again, for the average American, let me paint this, because decisions are being made in Europe that could trigger a nuclear war that's going to kill all of us. Because if there's a nuclear exchange between Russia and Europe, it will eventually involve the United States, and we will all die. So what I'm trying to tell the American audience is as follows. You're allowing the fate of your family And Joe, you know this. I've said this before. My daughter Patty just gave birth to a beautiful little baby girl in April, and that has changed my whole focus. I am now so much because now you know there's a reason to do this. A personal reason. This baby has to be allowed to grow up. This baby, this is a beautiful baby, has to be allowed to live a life, to have a chance, to give them the opportunity to succeed or fail. But she has to be alive to do that, and she won't be alive if we kill ourselves. We're letting a man in France who has a public support rate of less than 11%. Put our lives at risk. We allowed a prime minister in England who's now out and now been replaced by somebody who is probably not going to be around much longer to put the fate of the world in his hands. We've allowed a chancellor in Germany who may not be chancellor for much longer. So these failed politicians, part of a failed political system called the European Union, are making decisions that could lead to a nuclear war with Russia, independent of any input by the United States. Germany and Germany and England have created a unified nuclear posture. So they are now a singularity when it comes to deterring the Russian threat. The French have talked about deploying Rafale fighters, bombers, nuclear capable, to Finland with nuclear weapons. The Poles are talking about allowing British nuclear deterrence to come into there. So the Germans are talking about building their own nuclear weapons. This is the insanity. They're moving in the absolute wrong direction. Meanwhile, Russia doesn't have to do a damn thing because they have all the nuclear weapons they need, and the Russians have said over and over again, you guys do understand that if we go to war, it's over instantly for you, instantly. I mean, there will be no Europe left. European culture, all the symbols, it will all be gone. The Russians have been very clear about this. It's not going to be a one-time shot at Poznan. All of Europe disappears. It's all gone. And the Europeans are like, they're bluffing, and they are doing things. They're asking now the United States to bring in even more B-61 gravity bombs to increase the size of NATO's nuclear arsenal. And the United States is considering this. This is happening as we speak. Now, let me give you some good news. The good news is, in April of next year, Macron is gone, and he will probably be replaced at the polls hold by Marine Le Pen. And Marine Le Pen will not allow this joint UK-France nuclear partnership to continue. So that will be the end of that, and she will not tolerate the deployment of French nuclear forces into Finland. And so we can see that process being cleaned up. Alternative for Deutschland is doing very well in the polling. Now, we don't know what Germany's going to do. Are they going to ban them or whatever? But Merz is not going to be chancellor for much longer. And a future German leadership is not going to be calling for taking over Kaliningrad and building their own nuclear weapons. And the British, just let the British be British. They're falling apart as we speak. Their society is collapsing. Their infrastructure is collapsing. Their nuclear submarines were all in port being repaired. They don't have any nuclear submarines out. And so this posture that they're taking is unsustainable politically. And I do believe that the European people will solve this problem for us. And I'm looking forward to them solving this problem for us. This is another reason why Vladimir Putin isn't going to do anything precipitous. People are like, oh, Putin needs to put the pedal to the metal. He needs to strike Europe. He needs to strike those drone factories, strike the missile factories. No, Europe is a self-solving problem. Just let Europe rot and Europe will fall in. I think that's the direction the Russians are going. But in the meantime, as you said, they are providing Ukraine with drones. They are providing Ukraine with technology. And Ukraine is inflicting some harm on Russia, and that creates political pressures inside Russia to do things. And so it's not as though we're out of the woods yet. All it takes is one lucky hit, one drone hitting the Kremlin and collapsing the Kremlin roof, hitting Moscow in a meaningful fashion, hitting the Bolshoi Theater, hitting some landmark, and that changes the political realities. Again, we're letting madmen in Europe and an insane man in Ukraine put us all at risk. because they refuse to recognize the reality that the gambit to use Ukraine as a vehicle to bring down Russia has failed, and it's not going to be reversed.
These leaders in power can admit that. They put too much of their own careers at stake there. You're saying now new European leaders could jettison the Ukraine project and say, look, it's failed. We had nothing to do with it. We're in charge now. We want to end this. And we will agree to something like Alaska or even in something even more favorable to Russia just to end this. Do you think that's possible with new European leadership?
I do. I believe it's definitely possible. And when you look at, for instance, Marine Le Pen, she's not going to allow this policy towards Russia to continue. Whether or not she takes it to the extreme and pulls out of NATO, that's a different question altogether. The same thing with Alternative for Deutschland. They are not going to be promoting a war with Russia over Ukraine. England, Andy Burnham, who knows who he is, who knows what he does, who knows anything about him. But all we know about England is a failed state. The United Kingdom is a failed state. They can't get their trains to run, their power grid's collapsing, and there's no chance of them turning it around right now. I think the other day the national train system shut down because they lost all electricity for a while. That's just part of the decay of the United Kingdom. So, and Burnham doesn't have any plans that appear to be viable to reverse this. And there's other political pressures taking place. The immigration crisis in Europe is starting to rip Europe apart, divide Europe. So instead of coming together, Europe is breaking apart. And I do believe that there's a possibility, even within Poland, there's an increasing number of people in Poland that are, saying we don't want war with Russia. They're starting to get a voice, an anti-war voice. Bulgaria is definitely moving in that direction. So I'm hopeful for Europe. When I say Europe, I'm hoping for the individual nations that are on the European continent, the people of those individual nations, to make the right decisions, to get the right people in office to end this insanity.
Well, there's another possible theater for nuclear war that we have to discuss, and that's in the Middle East, Iran. Trump is trapped. He cannot admit he lost. Just the way right now the current leaders of Europe can never say that they have failed in their project against Russia. Trump can't say that he lost to Iran, but he can't win. He stopped, and apparently when Netanyahu shows up in Washington a few days later, there was a new U.S. attack. And then that ended, and he threatened this massive attack against the energy infrastructure of Iran, and Mohammed bin Salman is on the phone with him saying, don't do it, because the Iranians are serious, they will retaliate, they could destroy all of our energy infrastructure in the entire Gulf region, the water desalination plants, they could destroy all of the Gulf countries if you do this promised attack. And Trump backed off. But where does he go? And so he's got Netanyahu on one side saying, got to resume the war. He's got the Gulf Arabs saying, don't do it because we're finished if you do. He's stuck in the middle, and there's always the Israeli nuclear weapon as well. What's the way out for Trump and his nuclear weapons against Iran an option for him?
Of course it is. Right now you see a lot of stories about what's called Pickaxe Mountain, this underground facility in Iran that has taken on legendary proportions. And the money is that Iran's 60% enriched uranium is in Pickaxe Mountain, and that Iran has centrifuge capacity to continue enriching in Pickaxe Mountain. Something interesting happened just the other day. Iran unveiled a new missile, the Rad-3, which is an ICBM-capable missile designed to carry a weapon, according to the head of the IRGC, which of such destructive capacity as to render our enemies helpless. He didn't say nuclear, but the missile is of a size that could deliver a nuclear weapon to the United States and to Europe, definitely. They've unveiled this. They said if you strike us, we will be able to strike you. So Iran is creating the posture, at least, of the potential. They're going back to what they were doing before the war started. It's something I cautioned them not to do, but they created the concept of a nuclear threshold state, um, a state that could at any moment cross that threshold. They don't have a nuclear weapon yet, but they could acquire it at any moment and be prepared to use it. Now, this is very dangerous because they now have a weapon that's designed to carry a nuclear warhead ready to be used. And they say that the retaliation will be guaranteed if we're struck with a weapon of that nature. So, where are they on this? And this is dangerous because before the February 28th attack, remember, there was a negotiation taking place. Because remember, Trump said, we bombed during the 12-day war in June. We hit Ferdo, we hit Natanz, we hit Isfahan. And he said, we turned it into nuclear dust. Turned the Iranians 60% enriching into nuclear dust. They got nothing left. That turns out they had everything left. We didn't destroy anything. But the beauty of it is during that negotiation, if you remember, there was a period of time when Witkoff and Kushner afterwards said, after the bombing, the Iranians were trying to bluff us, trying to intimidate us. They said, we got 400, pounds of uranium enriched to 60%, and that's about. And I'm like, you guys missed the whole point. What they were telling you is that you didn't destroy anything. It's all accounted for, and they're ready to get rid of it. And they had an agreement to get rid of it. So the Iranians at that point in time had made a decision that they were no longer going to be a nuclear threshold state. The people need to understand that. Iran made a decision on February 27th. They had an agreement ready to be signed where they were walking away from being a nuclear threshold state. That is the biggest victory Donald Trump could ever have asked for. I mean, that is a huge victory because I, who would never say it's a good idea to attack Iran, I said that the Iranians becoming a nuclear threshold state creates a legitimacy in the minds of people who say we now have no choice but to attack Iran. For Iran to say we're not going to be a nuclear, we can account for the totality of what we have. Remember, there were inspection procedures that were going to go into Iran to account for this. That means that the Iranians knew where it was and they could confirm that all of it was there. What more do you want? But then we attacked them. And now Trump has claimed he destroyed it again, but we don't know where it is. We don't know how to account for it. And the Iranians are saying, we're done. We're done playing this game. We're not talking to you about this anymore. We don't trust the IAEA. So they're back to being a nuclear threshold state right now, which brings us back to a very dangerous thing. Now, the Iranians could be setting themselves up for success. And what I mean by this is, I don't know where we stand on the Strait of Hormuz tonight. Do they have a deal? Do they don't have a deal? I think they're still working out the details of the Oman, the third corridor and transit fees, etc. But let's say that they can get a Hormuz deal in place. One that I believe Donald Trump will go to the Omanis and say, Americans need a cut of your take because they're basically the Omanis are going to generate income, the Iranians are going to generate income. The Trump can come in and say, we've attached ourselves to the Omanis, so the United States now has the ability to generate income, and that means we are part of the process of the Hormuz. I have guaranteed the Hormuz is open. It's a victory. Donald Trump is the greatest man in the world. I'm the God. You guys should all vote for me. I'm awesome. He might be able to make that argument. But we still have the nuclear problem. Pickaxe Mountain is a problem. Donald Trump, I don't believe, can have an agreement that walks away with Pickaxe Mountain there and the 60% enriched uranium unaccounted for, etc. He needs to find a way to get back to February 27th. He needs to find a way to get the Iranians to back down. And again, I can't speak on behalf of Iran, and I don't want to, but Why else would Iran declare the Rod 3 missile to be ready to go now, ready to rock, ready to go? The Iranians are escalating this. Why? Because I think that it creates an opportunity for Donald Trump, if he can get them back to February 27th, to say, I saved the world from the Iranian nuclear weapon. I have a deal that now takes the 60%, it's all accounted for, etc. There is no nuclear threshold status. We've resolved this issue altogether. And then he can walk away, because now he has the two big victories. He can say, I solved the Strait of Hormuz problem, and I solved the Iranian nuclear problem. But if you don't have a solution for this nuclear program, Donald Trump can't walk away. Politically, he can't walk away. So then what is the answer? What if the Iranians won't go to February 27th? What does Donald Trump do? Because he's looking at disaster in the midterms, staring him right in the face. He doesn't have the conventional capacity to compel Iran to do anything. It's just the opposite. Iran can destroy everything. Would he use a nuclear weapon against Pickaxe Mountain? Now, in the past, when he, according to media reports, when he's asked the Pentagon to prepare nuclear strike plans against Iran, the Pentagon said no on constitutional order. There is no justification for this. Pickaxe Mountain changes that. Pickaxe Mountain now becomes a nuclear threshold capacity. Iran's creation of the Rod 3 missile declared creates the potential delivery. And so now there is a scenario, I believe, where the Pentagon could actually say, yeah, this one we can actually, we can consider acting on. Would Trump order nuclear weapons to be used against Iran? He's desperate. I mean, this is not the Russians have determined that Donald Trump is emotionally unstable. And so I think that it's inherently possible that he could do this. I would prefer that we create the situation which takes the option out of his hands. I would hope that the Iranians are listening and will do everything they can to prevent the possibility of America using nuclear weapons against Iran. Iran at one point in time thought it was a good idea to sign the deal back on February 27th. And I know everything changed, the betrayal of the United States, etc. But maybe it's a good idea to go back to that. Maybe that is the best thing for Iran and the world. Would Donald Trump view that as a victory? I think he's so politically desperate right now that he could call that a victory. It's certainly a better outcome than what we're facing right now. But this is a very, very dangerous situation, Joe. This is unbelievably dangerous, and the American people have to understand that. And there's only one person to blame, and that's Donald Trump. I mean, this whole war was a war of choice. They never had to do it. If Donald Trump is going to say that this is all about Iran's nuclear program, we had Iran's nuclear program in the bag, solved on February 27th. We had a deal. The Omanis confirmed it. A deal, ready to go. But has resolved everything. We'd never be having this conversation. But he opted out of it to go for regime change. We now know that regime change was impossible, never going to happen. But now we lost control of the nuclear negotiation as well, and it's a wild card out there. And the Iranians, they're playing a high stakes game, right? It's not a game. The Iranians understand that they have to drive the United States out of the Middle East. That is the only way. That's the root cause of all the problems. And so they're playing a very high stakes game here, and I'm worried. I do believe, because we are so weak, that nuclear weapons may be seen as the only option.
Yeah, the latest on Hormuz was this afternoon that Iran said that the U.S. had to leave the region and pay reparations and unfreeze assets and lift sanctions. All the 14 points that of Trump agreed to on the MOU. They're demanding that now in order to open the strait, but that could change. But are you convinced? Is the CIA, is U.S. intelligence convinced that the disenriched uranium is in Pickaxe Mountain, or just an Israeli story? Do we know for sure?
No, I don't know for sure. I'm not convinced of it. But what I'm convinced of is this: that when the Iranians sat down with Kushner and Witkoff and were negotiating about their nuclear program, that the Iranians had complete control over the 60% enriched uranium. They knew where it was, and they were ready and able and willing to present it to the United States in a fashion or through an intermediary, the IAEA, that could confirm it. So that at that point in time, it all was intact, and the Iranians could get their hand on it. Now, did they take it to Isfahan and get it buried in a mountain? Because the CIA certainly believes so. That's why you saw, that's why we had that failed rescue mission that was based upon Isfahan. But there's a lot of people that think that that doesn't make any sense to do it. The Pickaxe Mountain is a better option for that. But this is just all speculation. This is all theoretical. It could be anywhere. That's the thing. The Iranians are so good at hiding this stuff. It could be anywhere. Pickaxe Mountain could just be a ploy. They're feeding it along to divert. Who knows where it is? But what I do know is that until which time it's accounted for in its totality, the United States is going to view it as a potential nuclear threshold capacity that has to be dealt with.
So they would use a nuclear weapon to hit a potential nuclear stockpile that could maybe one day be used as a nuclear weapon. They would use the nuclear weapon now to try to stop that. It's insane. When they had a deal, the JPCOA was working, and as you said, this 27 February deal was even better than the JPCOA you've described. So somebody's got to get to Trump again. Maybe it's time for you to go back to Capitol Hill, Scott, and try to get a message to Trump that he's got to go back to that deal. It's the only way out for him, and he can claim victory, and then all of that. And I think the Iranians will let him. They don't care, I don't think, about the bravado that Trump would use. They want to solve these issues. One of them being the U.S. leaves the region and the unfreezing of the assets, the lifting of the sanctions. And they're willing, the reason they enriched to 60% once the JPCOA fell apart and Trump pulled out of it was to use it as the bargaining chip they're using it for right now. Isn't that right? People may have thought at the time, oh, they were enriching because they want to make a bomb. No, they were enriching so they could come to this point of a negotiation.
Look, in September of last year, Foreign Minister Arakchi and the Iranian President Pezeshkian, I'm butchering that name, Pezeshkian, came to the General Assembly. And they invited a group of people, journalists, activists and such, to come together for a meeting with the president. And we were able to ask questions. And I asked this question pointedly. What is the purpose? What is the justification of 60%? What are you doing? Are you, people call this a nuclear threshold thing. Are you secretly positioning yourself for the bomb? The president looked to Arakchi and basically said, answer this question. And Arakchi said, we have no desire for a bomb. We don't want a bomb. It's against, we have a fatwa against it. Of course, we killed the man who issued the fatwa, but he said, what we're doing here is we have to wake you up because you being the West are putting sanctions on and all this, and so we had to create a capability that woke you up, and we're using it as a negotiating chip. We created this capacity, and now for you to get rid of it, you have to give us stuff. It's a chip that we're using, and